Flute Quartet number 1, Being a Chilean Composer Abroad. Actually, this title is not the title I want to use, because SIMUC asked me to talk about the conflicts and being a Chilean composer and tendencies and perspectives. So how can I face this huge trouble? So first of all, let me change the title of this conference. I rather want to head it as a question. How is to be a Chilean composer abroad? Which is much better than what is being a Chilean composer abroad. How? That's the problem. And I will try to answer this question throughout this conference, story tale, or whatever you want to call it. Wait, something happened. Could you? No, it's not working. Why? I'm sorry. Something happened. This is not my software. Yeah, pero tiene que sonar cuando hago un clic y no cambiar la diapositiva. Sorry. Okay, let me start again. Okay. I don't know. Okay. Let me try another way. I need this music to start. I'm sorry. Here we are. music seems to be created in some place in Europe and by a European composer who starts his composition in the 20th century and gradually goes back in time and travels geographically. Eventually, the piece ends on the high Andes, nearby to Chile, Bolivia, Peru, and Argentina, before the Spanish conquest. And the question comes, how is to be a Chilean composer abroad? The question comes to me, and it isn't odd, uncomfortable though, because I've got to answer this question, and also this piece is mine. I did this piece in the middle of the 90s. I did it in Chile, but I started with non-Chilean elements to then change it step by step using 3 notes as a simple melody, which could be from anywhere, to eventually get my country playing pampais, zampoñas. So, musically speaking, I can say that I started the piece abroad, but being in Chile. To explain this situation, I would like to remember some history that I am quite sure and aware many people deeply know. However, because we know it, we almost never talk about it, and that's why we usually forget it. European written tradition music arrived into America in the same boat that Christopher Columbus did it. This statement that appears to be of a maximum evidence could be not entirely certain because in front of the high development reached by some American civilizations, the researchers would have expected to find some form of written record of sound art, as it had regarding to the spoken language. However, in this absence of written records, the arrival of the conqueror conditioned forward the development of the music until 1492 was done in the now called the New World. In America, understand that America is a big continent that currently contains in its territories more than 35 different countries. The total development of the new society, including music, was introduced forcefully, destroying and eliminating almost entirely the local traditions for later hand down the European fashions changing. Nevertheless, in this case, and exclusively talking about music, the evangelizer, in order to attract the faithful to the new religion, they respected some musical traditions to the praise of the new and unique Christian God. Mostly, these musical traditions stayed away geographically from the great center of social and economic development. Thanks to this, these have remained into our days, some of them having just some little changes in both aesthetically and technically. History is long and fascinating from sociological, anthropological, musicological, and ethnomusicological point of view. Nevertheless, exclusively talking about music history, the fact is that since the conquest in 16th century until our time, there has not been a musical movement that may be considered as an important part of the Western music history. This, among other variables, as a result of music written tradition, has been used since its introduction in America. It means the notation system, instrument, and the own music as an expression of art. Even technical and aesthetic changes have referred almost exclusively to those either suffered or proposed by trends and social and cultural changes in Europe. These were copied entirely by American musical movement. Because of this, there can be found valses, polkas, and mazurkas composed by American composers in time of the 19th century European nationalism, among other examples. Isolated examples of the use of pre-Columbian music began to appear in the early 20th century in Mexico from the hands, somebody said this earlier, from the hands of composers such as Carlos Chavez and Silvestre Revueltas, among others. Certainly, history is as long as the continent is, and surely this is one cause to explain that in the remote lands, example of the use of ancient traditions in concert music appears only in the mid-20th century, quite late in time. Despite this, the researcher can follow any clue gathering composers like Héctor Villalobos from Brazil, Pedro Humberto Allende from Chile, Alberto Ginastera from Argentina, and the Mexican ones as well. But the possibility of finding a musical movement in America is indeed impossible, and even less if we consider separately each musical development in their countries. A small comment about it. American composers who use pre-Columbian musical elements act almost entirely inspired by the European nationalism. Consequently, much music was composed using folk musical elements. The bad news is that this folk music had arrived by the hand of the conqueror. Then it wasn't American music, but European. In spite of this, the spirit of the creative reaction was not kept, giving way to the new avant-gardes to the 20th century newly arrived from Europe and forgetting the valorization of the previous century, 16th century. American music as the center of the artistic proposal. How is to be a composer abroad? Let's go to Chile. The last place in the world. This phrase with which Chilean, ironically, we refer to our country, is in practice totally true. Chile is the last destination for everything, a territory surrounded by the Atacama Desert in the north and cold rainforests in the south, the Pacific Ocean on the west and the Andes on the east. Thus, until the invention of airplanes to this sort of island, the latest news always reached at the end, and so also found a place to stay, because as well as difficult to get it, also gets out. So then the Chilean musical history finds explanation justifying itself the high amount of copies of European trends and a virtual empty stage of local proposals. Moreover, the diversity of pre-Columbian cultures in a territory of more than 4,500 kilometers long in that geography is as extreme, as diverse, is bigger than imaginable. There are from high civilizations such as the Incas and the Licanantais to very primitive cultures as Selknam and Yaganes, through Chinchorro culture which developed process of mummification 2,000 years before the Egyptians, and the Rapa Nui Eastern Island by Polynesian race pretty far from the American man. In overall, more than 20 cultures, 14 of which have offspring recognized until today. Returning to the center of discussion, which is music, and already located on the lands that today constitute the country named Chile, the local composers has been trained in the knowledge of European music. As I said before, from techniques, notation, and aesthetics through the instruments used and the concept of concert music as an expression of art, then comes the question, what does a Chilean composer do creating European music more than 10,000 kilometers away from Europe? You might believe that now I have at least one reasonable idea to answer this question. But the truth is that I have no idea at all. I'm sorry. Let me remember a tale I'm sure you know. Cirilo Vila, who studied with Olivier Messiaen, knew Messiaen's fondness for birds, so he gave to him a book of Chilean birds. Messiaen said to him, "Why did you come to Europe to learn what you already have in your country?" So after that story, I'll follow telling mine. The musical life in Chile is quite similar to the others all over the world. We have similar theaters, equal orchestras, politically right-speaking. Beethoven and Mozart are our favorites. People used to go to the concerts and clap at the end. Most people prefer classical music more than new classical music, contemporary music. I mean, they prefer old-fashioned rather than music from the 20th or 21st first century. But the thing is, in daily life, Chilean classical music world is not different or special. Also, by the way, we have an enthusiastic audience which like contemporary music, and they feel every concert and festival we have in Chile. Regard to the composers, the issue is the following. Chilean composers are musically trained in the European way. I already said this, but let me say it again. We have learned from the Renaissance counterpoint and to cutting-edge techniques through the classic and romantic harmony, music shapes and structures, and the 12-tone techniques, including the integral serialism. This makes sense to us, the composers, since we know the genesis and how it works. However, despite being holders and users of this musical and socio-political environment, the background is quite natural for some of us, though totally not natural for others. That is to say, all of us use the language, but we feel in different way to the message. Regard to this, there are two lines or tendencies. One, the biggest group following the European musical development without local considerations, and a small group of composers which were and are trying to make a blend between old and new European elements and local musical elements such as rhythm, melodies, extra musical aspects, etc. In other words, Chilean composers were always European ones in musical terms, but since the first half of the 20th century, some composers started to use elements of folk music. Unfortunately, for me, this tendency was not followed by most composers, but just a few of us. Again, that's why we cannot talk about a properly Chilean musical movement. It is impossible to mention the entire list of composers from Chile. As I told you, the musical life started almost 500 years ago, and we have one of the oldest composers association, the National Association of Chilean Composers, including Igor Stravinsky, Alberto Girastera, Aaron Kaplan as honorary members, among other important musicians in the world music history. Despite there are some examples of Chilean compositions by composers who were born abroad between 1935 and the second half of 19th century. And we can talk about the properly Chilean classical music life, not movement, on behalf of creative proposals considering José Sapiola, Federico Guzmán, and Eleodoro Ortiz de Zárate, all of them born in Chile. All the composers shown on the slide are over 50, or close to 50. Others are already dead. I am 49, just starting the youth of my old age. Most of us, Chilean composers, have come to Europe looking for experience, knowledge, opportunities, even inspiration. And almost always we find what we expected. But there is a great difference between my old-fashioned training and the under 50 years old composers. For example, when I was born, the internet didn't exist. This fact definitely marks a breaking point to understand how composers face the entire world using the internet and social media. Everything is available on the internet. Scores, recordings, interviews, documentaries, music history, musical analysis, tutorials to study all you want. I'm not saying the musical information wasn't available, but the cyber world makes the access to any kind of information much faster than the time it is usually required to develop entire and emergent style, or a new aesthetics, or a new treatment of sound, or a new musical movement. On this stage, composers, I'm sorry, on this stage, composers from all over the world, it's okay, could be considered as composers who carry aesthetics and styles from all over the world as well. Is that to say that any nationalism is impossible? For example, a composer from China could study Peruvian microtonalism and make a mix with ancient Egyptian musical elements and compose a piece to be played using folk instruments from South Africa. Or a German composer could study Mapuche's music and compose a piece based on their culture. Or, as I have observed on the Chilean musical framework, the music created by some Chilean composers sound like the music from some European composers. Having reflected on this overlapping of styles and aesthetics, I wonder whether it's possible to recognize a Chilean composers as such. How is to be a Chilean composer abroad? Musically speaking, it seems it's not possible anymore. Let's move to another spot. How is to be a Chilean composer working abroad? Which is a totally different question, and there is a lot of talk about. There are several variables to consider on this matter, such as developing a teaching career, being a researcher, being a music producer, etc. I would like to talk about aspects related to the score. I mean related to the process of commission, writing down the music, publishing, sales, including rental materials, and of course, copyrights. Unfortunately, in Chile, copyright doesn't work quite well. I mean, the Copyright Society does its job, but who have to pay doesn't. Orchestras, ensembles, and soloists usually don't pay rent or buy the scores and parts. They just consider as payment the performance of our work. Thus, nobody wants to make a lawsuit because you can be pigeonholed, as a complicated and even arrogant composer, and then nobody else will play my music. So we don't do too much about this situation because we prefer to have our music sounding instead of storage it at the bottom of a drawer. The same situation happens when we want to be published. If your music is published, the company will act on your behalf. Therefore, the performers will need to buy or rent the music. Again, playing your music becomes a problem. Being aware of this problem, two friends engaged with the idea of solving this gap, creating a new musical publisher called Editorial Nacional. The aim is to raise awareness of this situation and to convince that it is illegal to avoid payments. How hard is letting know that copyrights are the first payment for any composer? It is a retribution for our craft. Nevertheless, the road has been and still is so tough and has many barriers that they think that they shouldn't consider only the Chilean, I didn't respect the point. They think, the Editorial Nacional, that they shouldn't consider only the Chilean market, but the entire world to promote the Chilean composer's music. Being in Britain, I have received some commissions. All of them have included payment. And the weird thing is that this is normal. For example, last year, a student's ensemble asked me for a piece for work. Although I never asked for a payment, I was surprised that the students were concerned about composers' fees and copyright. This example, which it seems is the normal procedure, has been significantly different to what I have experienced in Chile. How is to be a Chilean composer working abroad? So far, it seems it is better being here in Europe than being in Chile. Let's continue about teaching. Unfortunately, most composers can't develop a career being just a composer. We usually develop at the same time an academic career. In Chile, there are at least two variables to consider on this matter. On one hand, we are a small musical market, and sadly, music and art in general are not well considered in our educational system. Besides, the institutions don't have enough positions to take up the all professionals are around. On the other hand, the academic position you can get almost always is a part-time job. And worse, it's considered a self-employed job. That is to say, the institution just pays to you for your teaching and for terms, not considering lesson preparation, concerts, composition, or researching. Just the teaching part is the important. Besides your excellent skills in teaching, you must encourage and engage the students. Also, you have to do the pastoral and psychological orientation of them. Otherwise, the students will disapprove you, and most of the time, the academic authorities will agree with them, because the educational system in general. This situation is quite different in developed countries, where you can get a position which considers the whole package. Even if you get a part-time job, the payment is quite better than in Chile. Everything without consider the society system take care of you in terms of health system and retired system. Even the educational system if you have children. But that is another discussion for another conference. In spite of this, nowadays the number of composers in Chile has increased due to the opening of new composition degrees in other institutions. Composers from all ages and tendencies share the small Chilean musical world. Most of them being, as I told you at the beginning, close to European musical development. On the other hand, some of us seem to be more familiarized to the musical heritage from ancient times and using it on our musical proposal. Does the later composers represent a sort of Chilean identity in music? I don't have an answer for that. What I could say is that music composition has become a global art without any territorial considerations. There is no way to recognize whether the music we are listening to belongs to a Chilean composer or not. And from my experience, I would say it's much better to develop a career as a composer in Europe than in Chile. Nevertheless, I believe we can't forget our roots and our heritage, which maybe could give us a sort of particular stamp. How is to be a Chilean composer abroad? So far, musically speaking, it seems it's the same. But as a worker, sadly, it is much better to be a composer in developed countries rather than in Chile. Finally, I am old enough to know I won't change the music history, but I am young enough to keep learning and studying. But more important, I am old enough to know that young composers can make change in the field of improving the job system, and I am young enough to help them and support them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos.
You are welcome.
And thank you for your piece also.
Thank you very much.
questions. I can begin. I have a few. From what you say, and from your own experience, but also from a lot of our colleagues, we could say maybe, or do you think we could say that for us to get out of Chile, to study or to live as a composer abroad, isn't it actually coming back?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Let's see. The music we are talking about is European. The art, the music we go to listen to, this act to listen to music is European. The music created just to be listened to, without other considerations. Is this music for religion, I mean, or for parties or whatever, celebrations? And this is music created to go to a special hall to listen to it. And this is European. The instruments are European. So, yeah, I think we are coming back. And we, I think, we are a kind of a global community. I am sure you know as well, composers from China, from Korea, from, I don't know, many places. And the aesthetics is quite similar. Because all of us are following the Central European tendencies, trends, aesthetically speaking, and technically speaking.
Yes, and with the globalization and the connection that we have today, I think it's opening up a little.
Totally.
Please, the microphone. Please wait for the microphone. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, but I see your point, but also it's an issue of cultural hegemony. You gave emphasis of the fact that you are coming, from your point of view, from a periphery. Yeah. Chile is somehow very far away. You know? And this definition of central or centrality and periphery expresses this very idea of cultural hegemony. So, the European culture or the North American culture are so dominant. So it becomes a center, like a kind of heliocentric system. Everybody travels around this center. So, so I think, Europeans will not challenge this position, but I think people coming from the periphery are much more sensitive about this asymmetry of power, and they can challenge it. They can support a discourse towards resilience, empowerment, to offer also visibility for the plurality of culture and the plurality of music. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a comment or is a question?
No, just it's a comment. Yeah.
I believe to analyze that we have to, as always, to separate the variables on this matter. About the United States, for example, in musical terms, they have Aaron Copland and John Cage. But the thing is, Copland and Cage were created at the beginning as a European composers as well. So, yeah, you're right. All of us are traveling around. I've been in China, I've been in Australia or other countries really far away from Europe. And the music we are composing is almost the same in aesthetics terms. Because of the internet or whatever, it doesn't matter. In the United States, it's the same thing. So I believe the composers, as art creators, we are kind of following the same trend for some reason, I'm not sure. And some of them are just taking some special elements to propose. I'm not sure if we can propose new way to compose music, but we can try, at least.
How do you think it's possible for composers going more in this direction that you say about the Chilean identity, if the composition are always for players, for performers who have been trained in a way, like a very classical way, and playing instruments that also are from the European tradition? So,
let's see, about playing, I think the techniques usually are the same in terms of exactly the playing the pieces. We doesn't matter if we a composer could create a piece based on Mapuche's rhythm, tutun, tutun. The bow is moving like in Vivaldi. It's the same, tutun, tutun. Doesn't matter the techniques about the playing. About the music you proposed. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that. I think it is quite personal. Cirilo Vila used to say, don't ask me, despite he composed the cueca or something, but he always said, don't ask me to compose folk music from Chile because I was born in a house where we just listened to Chopin and Schubert and Mozart and Beethoven. So they didn't know anything about folk music, and they didn't study it as well. So he didn't care about this because it doesn't matter because of why. But the thing is, if you want to do something, just do it. Let's try. Maybe it is good, maybe it is not, but try. And the most of the composers nowadays would like to follow the new tendencies, especially from Europe. It is a trend as well. I'm not saying that that is good or this is bad. I am saying that all of us are looking for the center of Europe. What is happening there? Who are the composers played the most? And who is doing this guy? I am trying to study with him. Or that's some situation like this. It is a way to be a composer. I have, let me finish. I lived the same situation that Becerra. I went to Spain in 1998, 99, and 2000 to study with Cristobal Hafter in kind of summer workshops. After 3 years, I decided to not. I decided that I wanted be a contemporary composer. I met Georg Friedrich, Haas, and another famous guys there. After listening to their music, I decided to compose the music I am doing it nowadays, using folk elements almost all the time. Now I am in Europe again. I am trying to be a contemporary composer, if you want. But what I am doing is learning. I'm open to everything. But what I want to do, or I wanted to do before coming this time to Europe to study, is to use my heritage, my people heritage, my people music. When I say my people, I am talking about the north of Chile. I don't know anything about Mapuches, about Selknam, about Rapa Nui people. I am talking about the Licanantais, the Incas, the Aymaras, because that is my region. That is the music I know. I grew up, listen to this all day. Boom, 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 boom. So yeah, it is mine. I don't have to study it because the music is here in my mind. I want to use it. If I'm going to do it well, I don't know. I don't know.
I wanted to take you to another topic of your presentation, or is there? Would you like to add something to this?
Yeah. Just on, I also want to thank you and think about this problem of identity and how it has been shaped from coming from. Because how far can we go from the concept of, which is not that old, the concept of national identities and nationalist identities, which is really 19th century, really 20th century thing. And what you're saying about going more into a sort of the problem of personal identities, which might be a very sort of 21st century issue, and and how your personal identity is shaped by all these connections and so on. And I think that is very important because we say, for example, this is European music. That's something so I mostly study 19th century music, and it's something that never comes as a word in 19th century discussions. So from the very early discussions about music in Latin America, it's always more about, they talk more about like cosmopolitan music. So they think this is something that we share in a sort of global conception.
Exactly.
And that's something that comes even in the late 18th century, something very often. And they say, the very first discussion, public discussion in the Mercurio Peruano, the first I know in Latin America about music publicly, 1791, they say there is a discussion between two musicians, and they say, you know, maybe we should do more Peruvian music. And I say, well, you cannot do Peruvian music and do it like Pergolesi, which was, the famous musician at the time, or Cimarosa, they say. And they say, but maybe in that case, we should play Yaravíes and do the best Yaravíes we can, which is, indigenous song.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's so the point was already there, but it was, I think going from this sort of nationalist aesthetic identity, how far can we take that idea of nation when it is also breaking so much?
Exactly. It's not going to happen anymore. I think this nationalism, it is impossible to do that. The whole information is on internet. You can be Peruvian, you can be African from some country and study that music, not being there and compose that music. But the thing is, there are some examples like this Chinese orchestras or this the Andes wind instruments in Chile and in Peru. But the entire musical world, it is the same. We have violins, we have clarinets, we have flutes, we have everything. We have the writing system, the notation system, I mean. And there is not any nationalism anymore. I think it is a personal choice if you want to be Chilean composer and make cuecas and tonadas or not. It doesn't matter. You are not more Chilean than me, or I am not more Chilean than you. We're composers. That's it.
As I said, you talked in your presentation at the end, I think, about the difference of working as a composer in Chile and abroad, or in your case in the United Kingdom now. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think that we can do to improve in Chile the way the work of composers is seen and retributed?
No, I don't know. I'm sorry. I have any idea. What can we do as composers? The National Association of Composers, they have done anything because they can't. The Copyright Society from time to time say something, but I don't know. First of all, the market is so small. 18 million people is nothing.
And from these 18 million people, not everyone is the market. So I think if you take...
exactly. Have an average or something.
Because this music, sadly, but it gets only to educated people, very educated people. And these are much less.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Sadly, I don't know.
Yeah.
What can we do? I'm sorry.
Do you think that the government should interfere more in this subject?
Unfortunately, we live in Chile, in a country which is the laboratory of the capitalism. Till now, we are more capitalism than the United States. We don't have regulation for anything. So market is the boss all the time, and unfortunately, it is. Nobody wants to pay. Everybody wants everything for free. So if the people don't used to pay a ticket for a concert, how can we ask for our job? If we want to go to a concert, most of the time we want to go. It is for free. But if we have to pay, let's see. I'm not sure if I want to go. We want to go to Pierre Boulez when he was in Chile, and we pay the really expensive ticket. But nobody is going to pay for my pieces or something. So I think, again, we have to analyze many variables to try to get an answer, because it is too complicated.
You talked about the new Editorial Nacional,
Yeah.
and they are making this campaign, you see, no?
Yes, they are gathering scores and trying to the how do you say conejillo de Indias, the Indian rabbit, not the Indian rabbit. They have made some experiments with me in Chile and abroad, and yeah, I receive orchestras have paid rental for my scores. So they're trying to figure out how they can reach other markets using the internet and the silver market and that kind of stuff. It is difficult. It is quite difficult. But despite, I think they are doing a really good job, and hopefully on January maybe they are launching this website, and we can can buy scores. Which is at least something.
Yeah. In relation to that, you told us that you were positively impressed in the United Kingdom that all these things, and you show us a list now of things that have to be done when somebody plays a piece, that they did it without even being asked to. And maybe that could be a way, just try to bring this philosophy or these principles into our society.
Let me tell you an impression I had here in Vienna. There is a market, one block over there, and the market was closed this morning. But there is some of these kiosks are just with glasses, with how do you say glasses? And nobody was there. And nobody stole the glasses. And nobody broke the glasses. How can we manage that in our country? You can leave your kiosk alone. You can't. Yeah, one couple went to my place in York with his daughter, and the daughter was crying the first school day because she has to leave the backpack and the coat, and she was crying because she thought that somebody were going to stole the stuff. And in Europe in general, even in big cities, you can live easily and don't be afraid that everything is going to be stolen. So if you are aware as a person that you have to pay a ticket because somebody is playing, is working, somebody composed the music, he was working. We have to create awareness about that in general, in all the fields, not just music.
Thank you very much, Carlos.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation.